There's a reason you can take a razor-sharp serrated blade, saw it back and forth across a piece of green wood as hard as you want, and get almost nowhere, while a dull, beat-up handsaw goes through that same piece of wood without much of a fight at all. Most people chalk that up to the wood being tough, or the serrations not being aggressive enough. That's not it. And if you've ever bought a knife specifically because the box said, serrated for tougher cutting, I need you to hear this before you trust that edge with your life in the field. Serrations don't saw. They never did. What they actually do, and why almost nobody, including a lot of the companies selling them, actually understands it, is what we're getting into today. By the end of this, you're going to look at every combo edge knife you own completely differently. I've carried serrated blades in a dozen different environments over the years: rescue hooks clipped to a harness, combo edge fixed blades, folders with 2 inches of scalloped edge tucked near the handle, and for a long time I used them the way everybody's taught to use them: sawing motion, back and forth, more aggression when something's not cutting fast enough. That instinct is wrong almost every time, and it took me embarrassingly long to figure out why. So let's back up to the beginning and actually establish what a serrated edge is built to do, because once the mechanic clicks, the rest of this gets a lot more interesting. Start with the basics. Most people skip. A saw and a knife look like they're doing the same job, cutting through material, but mechanically they're doing 2 completely different things. A saw removes material. Every tooth carves out a tiny channel and carries that waste up and out of the cut. That's why a handsaw leaves sawdust behind. A knife, on the other hand, whether it's plain edge or serrated, never removes anything. It wedges material. When a blade passes through wood or rope or cardboard, it isn't carving material away. It's forcing that material to split and compress off to either side of the blade as the wedge shape drives through. Same principle whether the edge is smooth or covered in scallops. That one distinction is the whole ballgame, and almost nobody who buys a serrated knife has ever had it explained to them. So if serrations aren't tiny saw teeth, what exactly are they? This is the part that changes everything. Each scallop on a serrated edge is essentially a miniature knife point, angled steeply into the blade. It isn't there to remove material the way a sawtooth does. It's there to change the direction you're wedging the material in. Picture trying to cut a length of rope lying flat on a table. Press a plain edge straight down into it, and you just crush the rope. There's nowhere for the fibers to go, so they compress instead of splitting apart. But angle that same edge, drag it across at a slice instead of a press, and suddenly it bites clean. That's the entire secret sitting right there. A serrated edge is just that angled, biting orientation, built permanently into the blade, scallop after scallop, so you don't have to manually tilt the whole knife to get the same effect every single cut. I wanted to see this instead of just explaining it, so I tested it the dumb way, out at the truck. Took a flat board, mounted a row of old utility blades flush and dead flat against the surface, and tried to drag the whole thing through a cardboard tube. Nothing. It skated right across, same way a fine polished edge skates across certain materials. Then I pulled every blade back out, re-angled each one the way a real serration is actually ground, and reattached them. Ran the exact same cut. Went straight through, clean, first pass. Same blades, same sharpness. The only thing that changed was the angle. That's not a knife getting sharper. That's a wedge getting pointed in the one direction the material can actually split apart in. Here's where it gets useful in the field, and where a lot of the marketing quietly goes sideways. If serrations are really just pre-angled wedges baked into the edge, then their entire job is handling material you can't easily rotate to the ideal cutting angle yourself. A strap under tension, taut paracord, a seatbelt across your chest in a rollover, thin sheet plastic, the skin of a feed bag, anything flat, fixed, or under load, where you don't get the luxury of tilting your blade up toward the sky to hunt for the perfect bite angle before you cut. That's the actual mission serrations were designed around, not tougher cutting in some general sense. Directional cutting specifically for situations where repositioning the material isn't an option. Once that clicks, you start noticing something uncomfortable. Most factory serrated edges are placed in nearly the worst possible spot for that exact mission. Almost every combo edge knife on the market, folder, or fixed blade puts the serrated section on the back third of the blade right up against the handle and leaves the plain edge running up front where you naturally lead with your slicing motion. Sit with that for a second. The entire point of a serration is fast, one-pass, directional cutting on material you can't reposition, and the standard factory layout berries that feature at the very base of the blade, the one section you can't reach without choking up your grip and awkwardly cranking your wrist, usually at the exact moment you've got a harness strap pinned across your chest or a cord wrapped tight around your fist with zero time to reposition anything. I rebuilt a test blade to check whether that actually mattered in practice or whether I was just being picky. Same profile, same steel, but had a duplicate ground with the serrated section shifted up near the tip instead of the handle, the section you actually lead with on a normal slicing stroke. Ran both blades through identical tests. Half-inch webbing pulled taut across a fixed anchor. Paracord under light load. A stretch of stiff tarp material pinned flat. Every single time, the forward serrated blade finished the cut in one continuous motion. No repositioning required. The factory pattern blade, serrations at the back, needed a second grip adjustment almost every time because by the time the material reached the serrated section, my hand had already traveled past the natural cutting arc of the stroke. Same steel, same sharpness. Completely different result in real use, purely from where the manufacturer decided to put the serration. Now, before you assume every knife company just got this wrong out of laziness, there's a real reason rear placement is so common, and it isn't pure ignorance. It's geometry, and it's worth understanding instead of dismissing. Cutting a deep serration into a blade thickens the material sitting directly behind that section of edge because each scalloped point needs enough steel behind it for structural support. Push that thickened, serrated section too close to the tip, and you weaken exactly the part of the blade that absorbs the hardest abuse in the field: piercing, prying, fine detail work, anything that loads the tip laterally. Keep the serration back near the handle instead, where the blade is naturally thicker and better supported by the tang running through the grip, and you sidestep that structural weakness almost entirely. So rear-mounted serrations aren't purely a design failure. They're a manufacturing compromise, and the problem isn't that the compromise exists. It's that nobody selling the knife tells you the trade-off you're actually making. That trade-off is real, and I proved it the hard way instead of just theorizing about it. I ground a set of aggressive serrations almost all the way to the tip on a separate test blade, then ran it through a week of completely normal field use, batoning small kindling, prying a stuck seam apart, general carving around a fire pit. Within a few days, I had visible microchipping right where the serration scallops met the thinnest part of the blade geometry, because there simply wasn't enough steel behind those points to absorb the load. That's not a flaw in the underlying theory. That's exactly what happens when a maker ignores the structural trade-off and just chases more serration means more capability without asking what it costs the rest of the blade. There's a reason the serious cutlery makers don't run deep serrations all the way out to a working tip, and now you know what that reason actually is. So does that mean rear placement is simply wrong, full stop, end of discussion? Not quite. And this is where the story gets more honest than a flat backwards design take. If the entire purpose of a specific tool is a single, dedicated job, a rescue hook clipped inside a vehicle door pocket, built for exactly one task, cutting a seatbelt or a harness strap in one clean motion with zero fine work required, rear placement close to the handle actually makes complete sense. You draw the hook, catch the strap against the base of the blade, where you've got the most leverage and the most control, and pull through in a single committed stroke. For that one narrow mission, the backwards placement is genuinely the correct answer. The real problem shows up when a knife is sold as a do-everything survival tool: food prep, carving, batoning, general utility, and fast emergency cutting all in one blade, because you cannot optimize a single edge geometry for all of those jobs at once without a real compromise somewhere. Most companies just never tell you where that compromise is hiding, and most buyers never think to ask. There's one more layer to this that almost nobody considers: until they're stuck with it out in the field, and it matters more than it sounds like it should. Maintenance. A plain edge you can touch up on a flat river stone with almost no skill and no specialty tools. That simplicity is a huge part of why a basic fixed blade earns its reputation as dependable survival equipment. A serrated edge needs a tapered rod or a specialty file to properly get inside each individual scallop. Out in the field with nothing but a flat stone in your kit, you can restore a plain edge just fine, indefinitely. The serrated section, though, will slowly go dull and stay dull because you physically cannot reshape that curved geometry without the correct tool for it. If you're depending on a blade to stay sharp far away from a hardware store or a proper sharpening kit, that's not a minor footnote. That's a genuine crack in the field reliable reputation that a lot of serrated survival knives lean on hard in their marketing. Now here's the reveal that ties this entire video together, and it's the same exact principle, just running at a scale small enough that most people never notice it. You know that moment when a brand new razor-fine edge skates right across the surface of something like cardboard or thin plastic wrap, while a coarser, technically duller-feeling edge bites straight in and cuts clean through the same material? That's not the coarse edge being sharper in any meaningful sense. It's the exact same phenomenon we've spent this whole video on, just invisible to the naked eye instead of built into an obvious visible scallop. A coarse grind leaves thousands of tiny directional scratches running along the edge, essentially microscopic angled teeth, that catch and grab material a polished, ultra-fine edge just slides straight across. Same wedge direction physics every time, just operating at a scale you can't see without magnification, instead of a scale you can hold in your hand. Once that connects, you realize serration design was never really its own separate category of knife knowledge. It's the exact same cutting physics operating at every scale, from a coarse pocket stone all the way up to a full-size rescue hook. So where does that actually leave the verdict? Serrations aren't an upgrade, and they aren't a gimmick either. Both of those takes miss what's actually going on. They're a specialist geometry, engineered to solve one specific narrow problem, cutting material you can't reposition into the ideal angle yourself. When a serrated section sits exactly where your hand naturally lands during a fast, one-motion cut, it solves that problem better than any plain edge ever could. When that same feature gets bolted onto the back of a blade purely because it's structurally easier and cheaper to manufacture that way, you end up with something that reads well on a spec sheet and quietly underperforms the one time you actually need it fast. Neither the plain edge nor the serrated edge is the objectively better knife. They're solving two different problems, and the mistake, the one almost every knife buyer makes without ever realizing it, is expecting a single edge to solve both problems at once without ever stopping to ask where the hidden compromise is buried. And that's the Ranger rule on this one. Don't trust a feature because it sounds capable on the box. Trust it because you actually understand the specific problem it was engineered to solve, and you've confirmed for yourself that it's sitting exactly where your hand will be when that problem shows up in real life. Any company can grind serrations anywhere they want on a blade and slap upgrade on the packaging. Whether that feature genuinely helps you or just gets in your way at the single worst possible moment comes down entirely to geometry, not marketing copy, and not brand reputation. That's it for this one. Understand the wedge before you trust the edge, and I'll see you on the next one.